Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this very practical session, which I hope you'll all enjoy, where we're going to run through with you how to run a successful HR tech project. My name's Louise Johnston, and I'm a Customer Success Manager at Phase 3, and this is my colleague, James Proctor, who is our Head of Consulting and Services. Phase 3 are the people behind People Technology, and we are the largest providers of HR tech consultants in the UK. So recently we've noticed that the gap between HR and technology is increasing. My background is actually in HR, and I think it's fair to say, and I hope a few of you will start to nod here, that we weren't necessarily born and bred to run HR tech projects. Yet we have to use technology, and more recently we're even expected to implement it and manage those projects. So we've devised 12 steps of success of how to run these projects successfully. This starts with how to make a business case, selecting the right technology for you, looking at different project management skills, because again, that's an area that we're not used to in HR, implementing your new piece of kit, and then right through to business as usual. So the next half an hour, we're going to run through those 12 steps with you. Steps 1 to 12 are for a full implementation project, and steps 3 to 9 are for something of a smaller scale. So without any delay, I'll hand you over to James, who is going to talk to you about how to create a business case.
Okay, so the case for change in terms of HR systems, as we all know, is one that really doesn't make itself. The business case has to be generated by yourselves working in HR and payroll, and use that as an opportunity really to firm up your thinking and understanding around why you feel there is a case for change. We always say, drive, don't be driven in terms of HR technology projects. We know that there is a lot of change, and you'll be seeing today from all of the suppliers that their products are doing new and wonderful things. So the business case is something to take some time over and focus on. Look first at an overview. Why do you feel you have a case for change? What is the driver? Is there a burning platform, for example, or do you feel that your product is outdated? Look then at what options you have, and an option really might include keeping your current system and investing a little bit more in it, so do include that in the business case. Look at the benefits that you might get from a new system and weigh that up against the risks. So be really honest at that stage, and it could be that you need to speak to people that are here today to find out what benefits you could get from a HR product and what savings you might be able to make and efficiencies, but don't over-egg that, is what we're saying. Take a good long look at whether or not those benefits could be achieved, and don't put in the business case something that you feel is not going to be realistic and achievable. And finally, weigh up the risk. Look at what the risk points are for the organisation during this implementation or during this selection. Now, this could be just for a learning system or a recruitment system, or it could be a full ERP solution. So weigh up with stakeholders in the business what the risks are in terms of implementing that new product, and that could include employee engagement and manager engagement in that process as well. As I said, the case for change rarely makes itself, so really do use this as an opportunity to firm up your own understanding of why you want to make a change in your HR systems.
So step number 2, we move on to selecting the product. But before you go out to vendors, and it can get really exciting, especially at events like today where you want to go out and see what's out there. But before you do that, I want you to be grounded in who you are and where you are at. So, as James said, do you definitely need new HR technology? Don't underestimate the size and the scale of these sorts of projects. If it's that you do want to go out there, to enable you to actually understand properly who you are and where you're at, I've broken this down into 4 factors for you. So the first one is, who are you? What's the size of your organisation, and what's your culture? What's your attitude to technology? Do you love technology like James, or do you potentially hate it? Because again, as HR people, it's something that we might not be that comfortable with. And what's your appetite for risk? Any project of this scale does carry a degree of risk. Where are you in your organisation? What's the status quo? Do you have any competing projects which are going to take time and resource away from implementing your new product? And what's your in-house skill? Again, your attitude here to technology. Do you have an ally in IT? As you start to progress, you're going to start learning lots of new terminology and lots of new jargon, and it's a world that is completely different from HR. If you've got an ally in IT that you can ask those not so silly questions to, I'd say you're halfway there. We then start to think about the factor of the product. What does that look like? What modules does it have? What's the functionality? Will it have to configure with payroll or perhaps a T&A system? Will it integrate with other systems, and will it contain self-service and have mobile compatibility? Take a look here back at your business case. You've already written it, so let's make sure that we use it. And the fourth factor is your supplier. What does their service and support actually look like in real life? What's their reputation? And most importantly, what's their security policy? So during the stage, you might want to go out to a third-party consultant for some help here, or you could try online at the Phase 3 website. There's a system selection tool which will give you an overview based on the size of your organisation, which product might be good for you. And be sure to ask your network, what do they use, do they like it, and what's the pros and the cons?
Okay, so now we move on to the process of actually selecting a system. So firstly, we're going to talk about pre-selection. So prior to engaging in your system selection project, internally, you need to be reviewing processes, requirements, and we call this requirement solicitation. You've probably been through this process at some stage. So we recommend workshops with the wider HR, payroll, finance, some managers, some recruitment team, if you're looking at a full implementation project, and understand where all the touch points are of that system and what you want it to do. Now, we often recommend getting some help in this process because it's something that you might do once in a blue moon in terms of selecting a new piece of HR or payroll software. And in terms of the actual process of gathering those requirements, make sure that you weight them. So what's essential for your organisation? What's nice to have? And what is something that actually you could do without. And events like this are great for looking at what systems can do, because we can be limited in our knowledge in terms of what our current product offers in terms of requirements. So you can be a bit more adventurous and look at events like this, at what other functionality is actually available. And it could be that your current supplier already has that functionality available. So usually we start with the invitation to tender or a request for a quotation, and you might use the tool like Louise mentioned to shortlist who you're going to invite to tender, or you might put that out there on a platform and await for responses. Then you're going to have a look at the products and work out whether or not it meets the requirements, and the final stage then is the response from you in terms of selecting that actual system.
So that's when you're obviously going to start going through your beauty parades. Now, the beauty parade is a showcase of perhaps 3 to 5 different products. And I'd always recommend here that you have a second round to see whether or not you're still comfortable with it. I also recommend that you have a team workshop before and after each demonstration to see whether or not it actually delivered. James touched on requirement solicitation. So to dig a bit deeper there, I recommend that you actually have a list of 10 requirements from your new system, and from each of those 10 actually work out then 5 things to identify from your demo whether or not it's actually met the criteria. Perhaps make up a real life scenario of something that's happened in your organisation. So take the employee life cycle from onboarding, recruitment, going through to their L&D needs, perhaps that person goes off sick or there's disciplinary action, and find out whether or not that system has actually gone through that in real life. And if it didn't deliver, don't ever assume that then it's going to when you've actually gone live. Start to do your due diligence now. So look at your company stability of your vendor, visit your vendor, visit customers of that vendor as well. And when you visit those customers, perhaps pick one that's currently implementing, so a new customer, and then a customer that's perhaps used that system for 5 or 10 years even, and see what that actually looks like in real life.
Okay, so step 4, this is doing your homework. So this is the stage between when you've agreed which system you actually want, but before you've actually signed on the dotted line. So at this stage, the homework is pretty much all yours. And what we're talking about at this phase is the fact that until you sign that contract, you are still in control. You're a potential customer and you have weight in terms of what you ask for. So I risk being very unpopular with the people in this event with the things that I'm about to tell you, but what we really want you to focus on in terms of contract negotiations with the vendors is what has teeth. What will actually make a difference in real life to you. So asking them to commit to an SLA of 100% response time within 2 minutes of every issue, what would the point of that be if there were no consequences for the vendor? So look at the things that actually matter to you. So duration of contract, for example. Is there an early exit clause in that contract? Can you get out of it if you need to, if the business changes or grows, or if there's any potential issue with that supplier? Consider the consultancy costs, not just for implementation, but for the lifespan of the product, because it could be that you're offered a different rate up front that changes throughout the life cycle of that product, which might be 5 years, for example, in a contract length. And also look at, is there anything included in the contract that means that that supplier has to meet legislation and not charge you extra to do that? So include all of those things in your questioning and make sure that you involve a legal eagle in terms of the actual clauses within that contract to make sure that you are getting the best deal and asking for that best and final offer from the supplier.
So the next thing you're going to have to think about now is data. And again, as an HR person, I'm just thinking, oh, what do I even do here? Data is rarely in good shape. We have never been to an organisation with a perfect data set, and I don't think we ever will, to be honest. So the first thing you're going to need to do with your data is to cleanse it. Your data is going to be incomplete. Some of it might not be up to date, and it's then going to need formatting, ready to fit the new needs. And don't forget here, there's also the implication of GDPR. We still see now that many clients want to take across as much data as they possibly can just for that comfort. But of course, you can no longer do that. So assess your data. Why do you have it? And do you actually need to refer to it? So sadly, this part is actually rolling up sleeves and doing some real work. So you're going to be sifting through files, checking data and changing it. Part of this is also going to be sending out to your managers and your staff to check their own details. So whilst this isn't necessarily a difficult job, this is a job that is going to take time.
Okay, HR is the project manager. So we've signed our contract, decided what system, and now we're in project mode. And the reason that we raise this as a topic in the 12 steps is because depending on the scope of the project or the size of the organisation, the project management responsibility might fall on you in HR, and it might just be part of a wider role that you do in terms of the project. So it is more of a natural skill set for HR, project management, but not necessarily working with technology and IT. So just quick crash course, formal versus agile methods. Formal, we tend to think of Prince 2, and that gives us structure and governance and a really sound process to work through in terms of the project. And the more agile methods might be more relevant for when you've got a smaller scale project or a larger team and much smaller milestones to work towards. So yes, there might be some project management included in the project overall with the supplier. The supplier is more interested in allocating their resources to you. You know the organisation, you know what the project needs to look like in terms of communication, engagement, and that's something that the supplier really can't do for you. So it would be unfair to expect them to be able to do that for you. The thing that we always recommend is start off, if nothing else, with a PID, the project initiation document, to set out how you're going to manage the project, how decisions will be made, and how you'll manage risk and issues. And if that's the only document that you create, do make sure that you refer back to that throughout the project, because as we know, in project teams, people can leave, and throughout the life cycle of a product, which might be again 5 years, there could be lots of changes in the team. So keep a log of why you made those decisions and what the risks were at the start, to make sure you've got a really firm understanding around how the project should be run and what should actually be delivered.
Step number 6 is about sorting the stakeholders and figuring out who is who in HR tech. This is an area that actually within project, we do forget to spend the time and actually think about resourcing. So the first thing you're going to do is identify your project board. So this ensures sound governance all whilst you're going through change control and making sure that actually the project results in your objectives being directly achieved. There's going to be 3 major stakeholders here. The first one is a decider. Now that is your sponsor, your governor, or your executive. The manager, who is the internal project manager, as James just touched upon. And then the key one here is enough doers. And like I said earlier, they're the people that are actually going to be rolling up the sleeves and doing the real work. So it would be nice here to see the natural strengths of HR professionals shine through and manage people, which is one of the things that we're supposed to do well. But mix in various different job titles and new jargon from IT, and very quickly this becomes a world that we're not so confident in. So use your natural strengths here. You're also going to come across lots of different types of consultants within this project. So I'm going to run through the different types that you will come across here. You'll have a consultant from your vendor. Now they are going to have impeccable product knowledge and a good service, but there will be an associated cost, and don't forget to think about lead times. So again, look back at your project plan in terms of the lead times. You're going to have interims as employees. Now this is great for long projects and internal communications, but their independence is soon going to be jeopardised when they become an employee of your organisation. You've then got your third party, and you've got the high calibre, you've got specialism, and it spreads the risk as you're not just reliant on that one person. But again, there's the associated cost and the associated lead time. So within these projects, this is something that we often forget to do, but spend that time figuring out who is who.
And I think the point there, Louise, is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Yeah. Okay, so step 7, the implementation. So this is when the fun begins in the internal team. So this takes the lion's share of the whole project, essentially. So this is the building blocks of the system that you're going to be using for the next few years. So every project has a completely unique context. So it's really difficult for vendors to be able to support you through that. So what we always say is, as HR, use your natural interviewing skills to work with the consultants and the specialists of these products. Ask the why 5 times. Ask what happens if I do it this way and I need to change. Think about what the business might be doing in a few years' time in terms of direction of travel and what you might need to take into account. Now, one of the things we often see in the implementation phase of a project is what we call the consultancy stalemate. So you say to a consultant, what can the system do? And they say, well, what do you want it to do for you? And you're sort of limited in your knowledge of the products, but they're limited in what you actually do in your processes. So use those open questions and really do engage with other users of the product to find out how they do things differently. And expect a consultant to say no. If a consultant doesn't say no, then they're not your best friend, and you really need them to be at this stage of the project. Another really important tip is around customization versus configuration. Now, most products these days are off the shelf in some way. They have capability internally to brand, to create workflow, to do calculations, and that's all configuration within the system. Customization means changing the core being of the product, maybe putting a new skin on it. And that's fine if you really do need to customize a product, but remember, systems have upgrades and patches and bug releases, and during those, any customization might have to be redone. So factor that into any resource planning for the future.
So we've implemented the system and it's now time to test it. Now I think this is quite an exciting part of the project, because after so much work, it's really gratifying to finally see your system come alive for the first time. But there's always a but. We need to test it. And testing can be frustrating because you need to meet the milestones and start to work towards sign-off. And there's different types of testing here. So you've got your user acceptance testing, which will be structured and recorded. And this is proof as to whether or not your system actually meets the specification that you went out for. This is your chance to decide whether to accept the system and sign off the configuration. But it isn't the time to start adding to scope, which is something that we actually see quite a lot. Now again, with user acceptance testing, we've got a tip here. It's not about you marking your own homework. I would recommend that you have an army of testers to actually go through the scripts and do this from a different perspective who haven't actually seen things before. You're then going to have to move towards piloting. And my recommendation again here is that you choose an area to pilot, go live, a small part in your organisation, I would choose an area that's actually hard to reach and where you know there's going to be some problems. That might sound controversial, but that means when you go live to the rest of your organisation, you've already started to weed out the difficulties that you're going to have. So get through that now in the piloting stage, and it will give you an idea of what to expect in the future. And if you've got payroll in scope, then I'll hand over to the payroll man.
Yeah, I represent payroll in this in this slide. So in terms of parallel runs might not just refer to payroll, but essentially the parallel runs means using two systems concurrently. And the first decision is, how are you going to actually do those parallel runs? Are you going to dual enter data into two systems, or are you going to enter all the data into your old product and then migrate it to the new system and then run the processes through there? Now, in terms of recommendations, for an internal team to get used to the product, the parallel run phase is actually really useful for them to get used to entering data and seeing the end result of it. The other thing that we have to consider is there going to be any difference between the two systems? Now, from a payroll perspective, taxable pay, annual pay, etc., we don't want any differences because we know what the employee has been paid. But referring back to that, building your old system in the new one, what happens if your new system is actually more accurate? What we don't want to be doing is unpicking the accurate work of the new system to make it match the old system. So real-time parallel runs can help with that, but most products these days have the option to hide any parallel run adjustments or to be able to hide the pay slips that you were using during the parallel run phase. The other thing to consider is parallel run success is limited to the months that you're actually testing. So if we're doing a parallel run in March, April, May, but we have an annual bonus that's a really complex calculation that's paid in September, we're not going to be able to test that during the parallel run phase. So make sure that any items like that are included in the UAT script, and make sure that you pick up any of those one-off or strange situations that can occur to make sure that the new system can cope with it. Because we don't want to sign off and say, yep, the payroll balances and everything matches, move into the live payroll run, and then realise that some of the calculations actually aren't doing what they should be.
Step number 9, we're getting ready now to release the new system to the humans in the organisation. And this is something that happens after the project, so it can, again, be an area that's forgotten about. So this is an opportunity, again, HR, bring out your inner marketeer here. So as well as pushing out the new system to everybody in the organisation, this might look like YouTube videos, emails, postcards. Isn't this exciting? We've got a new all singing, all dancing system. So I would recommend here that you start to identify different people in the organisation. Perhaps you've got somebody that's already an upcoming IT star. So it's not just about top-down change management, but bottom-up, and bringing the organisation together as a whole. And also thinking about training here. Will you do train the trainer events in HR? Is it realistic that we will be able to train every employee on how to use the new system? Probably not. And don't forget that every system does have its limitations, so manage expectation here as well.
Okay, the exciting step, step 10, it's not the end, but we're going live with the new system. So go live is two things. It's the practicality of actually getting the system out there and releasing it to people, but it's also a massive risk point in terms of the project. What happens if it all goes wrong? So in terms of the actual switch on of a system, that might be deploying an installation of the software, or it might just be sharing the URLs and the links to the live system, usernames and passwords, obviously taking into account GDPR considerations about how we share that data. Now, in an interesting example, one organisation that we worked with that went live had done masses of engagement, as Louise said, really engaged their marketeers, and then everybody tried to log into the system on the first day, and the system died because there were too many people trying to log in all at once. So since then, lesson learned, maybe try and phase that go live over a number of hours or a number of days and release it to different areas of the business, just so you don't get that bottleneck, and so the first experience of the product isn't actually a negative one. In terms of the risk point there, obviously we're now switching on calculations, workflows, any scheduled jobs in the system, but also we're turning on the security profiles and access to data. So what happens if there is an issue and you realise that somebody has inappropriate access, make sure that you have a backout plan. Does your internal team know how to turn the system off if there is an issue? So if a manager logs in and can see everybody in the organisation, for example, or one of their peers. So it's a real risk point to make sure that throughout your testing process, you've really ensured that everything's accurate in terms of that access to data. And often what we see is that people open up access in a test system first, just showing the list of names and saying, if there is any issue here, please let us know, because this is the data that you're going to see.
And that leads us on nicely to step 11, which I like to call safeguarding the early days. So you might think that we've gone live now, so the hard work is over, but actually it might be that it's just begun and you're entering into a new journey now. So the system is live. We want to make sure that this project is a success, because without being dramatic, it is a direct reflection of the HR department once it gets out there. So this part really is all about help and support. Help for you and your HR team and the support from your vendor. But also it's about where your employees are going to get help. Do you have a team of super users who are going to answer all the queries, or is it going to be that you've got an internal help desk ready for everybody in the organisation to ring should they have any login issues and so on? I'd recommend as well that your super users join a community. There's lots of communities out there which look like user groups where you can get together with other people who have been through similar projects as you to talk about how the implementation project went, lessons learned, and how they actually start to use their product in real life.
Okay, and finally, step 12. So this is business as usual. So our project team's disbanded, everybody's gone back to day jobs, and this is where there is another risk point in terms of the project, in that if the knowledge leaves the business, what do we actually do? The other thing to focus on here as well is who has responsibility for the system, who signs off changes, where is that change control procedure? You know, payroll, for example, could ask for a new element to be set up and not realise that it impacts something on the costing or the general ledger file. How do we make sure that doesn't happen? And so the key there is taking that responsibility in terms of system maintenance. Systems are like cars. You need to put petrol in and you need to have an MOT to make sure that they are looked after throughout the lifespan. The other thing at this stage that we're going to be looking at is lessons learned. Again, it might only be a small project or it could be a full system replacement, but go through the lessons learned project. It's sound project governance, and it helps if you have a second or third phase of the project, which might be around releasing more modules or buying extra functionality. The other thing at this stage, benefits realisation. Probably most organisations will be asked to do this, but did you achieve what you set out to achieve on time, on budget and in scope? If you didn't, it could be that there are further phases that are required in your project. And we often refer to this mid-contract shift in attention. So just quick show of hands, who's in the middle of their contract for their HR system? A few of you? Okay. So what we mean by this is at the start of your projects, you get lots of attention from the vendor, their sales team are there, you get all of the support, customer success, and then at the end of your contract, when you're ready to renew, they start to turn up and knock on the door again. What happens in the middle? So we really do recommend making sure that you engage with your customer success managers from your supplier, attend their beta testing groups, attend user groups that they host, just to find out what's happening with the product and what might be released for you and how you could derive further benefits from their software. Software doesn't stand still. And our final recommendation really is throughout this project lifespan, always make sure that you develop, don't tinker with systems.
So that leads us nicely onto the further resources. We've tried to make this as practical as we can, but if you'd like to speak to us after the session and we'll take some questions, then please do ask. And don't forget to have a look at our website, which is www.phase3.co.uk, where you've got an ebook, so you can refer back to the 12 steps that obviously we've whizzed through just now. Connect is our system selection tool, which might be of interest as well. And we've also got a competency indicator. So again, that can measure where you are in your HR tech career. And there's lots of free resources and templates on there, including a business case template as well. So would you like to ask any questions? No?
No.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I'll answer the common question. No, we don't work for Asda. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.